Okay, you've set up some practice notes, and so you've already practiced what to do before a lecture begins. Now go back to your regular notes that you're taking on the Reading 100 content, because I want you to write down some notes on this lecture that I'm giving you right now. This is not on the practice Cornell notes, but on your regular notes that you take. And I'm going to talk about what do you do during a lecture. There's a couple of things you do. Number one is you have to listen actively. So what does that mean, active listening? That means you're going to pay attention to certain things. Specifically, you're going to pay attention to key concepts and main ideas and supporting details. That might sound a little familiar. That might sound similar to what you do when you highlight or annotate, because essentially taking notes in a lecture is annotating, only it is with listening instead of with reading. It's still the receptive part of language. So you can do some things to help yourself. One is space, and that is skip lines between those main ideas. And the other is to create white space so that you add notes later. So white space means that you don't go to the end of a margin, or you don't go to the end of a page. You leave a lot of margin space. Cornell notes give you the opportunity to do that. That's partly why so much of the space is not used during the actual note taking. And you also can help yourself by abbreviating, because things go so fast you can't possibly write everything down. Here's an example of somebody's abbreviation that helped them. So you can come up with your own set, but be consistent with it. These are just examples. Listen actively is the very first number one thing to do to take notes during a lecture. You also need to ask questions and answer your own questions. This is really important. So where do these questions come from? Well, they come from your readings because, of course, as a before step, you've done all your homework. You've read the readings before we started. Now you have a way to ask questions. You raise your hand when you don't get it or you look perplexed. That is really the only control you have as a student. Your face and your hand shooting up when you don't get something is the only way to slow it down or to get the feedback that you need. Raise your hand when the professor asks questions. So if they're asking a question, raise your hand to participate. The more participation you have, the better it is to actually take notes during a lecture. You're going to also listen and watch for cues. So not just content, but cues. What does that mean? Well, phrases like "the point is" tells you that it's going to be a main idea, or "follow up on page 135. Write down page 135, circle it, and put an arrow next to those parts of your notes, because that means that the text is going to support the lecture. And if you don't write it down, you don't know that. The next step tells you you're moving on to another point. There's also idiosyncratic behaviors. This is a word that means, idiosyncratic is a word that means, sorry, my computer keeps doing that, that means individual to that professor. So what is that person doing that gives you a clue? Are they, for example, always walking back to their podium to answer certain questions, but don't walk back on other questions? Maybe the ones that they use the podium for are actually the questions that will be on a test. That's an idiosyncratic behavior. Watch for those things because they give you clues. Another thing to do is anytime your professor finds something important enough to write down on the board, then you write it down in your notes. It's also important to take notes on discussions, and that's really difficult to do at times because how do you know if what the people contributing to the discussion say is what you're supposed to remember? So, two ways to handle this. First, take notes anytime the instructor pipes in. That's one thing. But also, when you're done with the lecture, as it's going on, start writing down some main ideas, some main focuses. And when you're done, do a little summary on your page. This discussion included yada, 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 so that you at least have something in writing about what transpired. What should you do if the instructor speaks really fast? And a lot of students have told me this is a real problem. The instructor talks so fast because there's so much material to go through, and even if you ask them to slow down, they don't. So what can you do? Well, you still have some power in this situation. This is really a cause-effect map, so I'm actually drawn the cause and effect map for you here to help express this information. When the professor talks really fast, this is what the event is, therefore I will be more prepared than otherwise. I know that professor goes quickly, so I am going to be really up on the readings prior to class. I am going to choose the most important parts to write down, not get everything, but just the most important parts, but I'm going to leave a lot of empty space so that I can go back later and fill it in. And how do I know what it is? Well, maybe I can record it if I have permission ahead of time. I'm going to ask questions. That can really slow things down, and it helps the professor know that maybe they're going too fast. So it helps control the pace, but it also gets my question answered. I can see the professor after class to fill in those blanks. I can go to another lecture that person is giving. Maybe there's another section going on. I can ask the professor ahead of time, can I listen to this again somewhere? Maybe it's online, or maybe there's another section that the professor's going to present again. I can also get together with other students and share. And when I do that, then I might be able to share what they might have missed, and maybe they've got information that I missed. So that's a really good idea. There are things that you can do even if a professor talks too fast. So now what I want you to do is take out one of those practice blank Cornell note setups that you have, and I'm going to put on a new lecture here. It's pretty short, it's a TED Talk, and I want you to take notes using all of those during the lecture tips that I just gave you. This is the title of this Texting Saves Lives. That's the title of the lecture, and the rest of this video will be this TED Talk, and then there will be questions for you to answer on Canvas.
To most of you, this is a device to buy, sell, play games, watch videos. I think it might be a lifeline. I think actually it might be able to save more lives than penicillin. Texting. I know I say texting and a lot of you think sexting. A lot of you think about the lewd photos that you see, hopefully not your kid sending to somebody else, or trying to translate the abbreviations LOL, LMAO, HMU. I can help you with those later. But the parents in the room know that texting is actually the best way to communicate with your kids. Might be the only way to communicate with your kids. The average teenager sends 3,339 text messages a month. Unless she's a girl, and then it's closer to 4,000. And the secret is she opens every single one. Texting has a 100% open rate. Now the parents are really alarmed. It's a 100% open rate even if she doesn't respond to you when you ask her when she's coming home for dinner. I promise she read that text. And this isn't some suburban iPhone-using teen phenomena. Texting actually over-indexes for minority and urban youth. I know this because at DoSomething.org, which is the largest organization for teenagers and social change in America, about 6 months ago we pivoted and started focusing on text messaging. We're now texting out to about 200,000 kids a week about doing our campaigns to make their schools more green or to work on homeless issues and things like that. We're finding it 11 times more powerful than email. But we've also found an unintended consequence. We've been getting text messages back like these. I don't want to go to school today. The boys call me faggot. I was cutting. My parents found out and so I stopped, but I just started again an hour ago. Or, he won't stop raping me. He told me not to tell anyone. It's my dad. Are you there? That last one's an actual text message that we received. And yeah, we're there. I will not forget the day we got that text message. And so it was that day that we decided we needed to build a crisis text hotline Because this isn't what we do. We do social change. Kids are just sending us these text messages because texting is so familiar and comfortable to them, and there's nowhere else to turn, but they're sending them to us. So think about it, a text hotline, it's pretty powerful. It's fast, it's pretty private, no one hears you in a stall, you're just texting quietly. It's real time. We could help millions of teens with counseling and referrals. That's great. But the thing that really makes this awesome is the data. Because I'm not really comfortable just helping that girl with counseling and referrals. I want to prevent this shit from happening. So think about a comp. There's something in New York City that the police did. It used to be just guesswork, police work, and then they started crime mapping. And so they started following and watching petty thefts, summonses, all kinds of things, charting the future, essentially. And they found things like when you see crystal meth on the street, if you add police presence, you can curb the otherwise inevitable spate of assaults and robberies that would happen. In fact, the year after the NYPD put CompStat in place, the murder rate fell 60%. So think about the data from a crisis text line. There is no census on bullying and dating abuse and eating disorders and cutting and rape. No census. Maybe there's some studies, some longitudinal studies that cost lots of money and took lots of time. Or maybe there's some anecdotal evidence. Imagine having real-time data on every one of those issues. You could inform legislation, you could inform school policy, you could say to a principal, you're having a problem every Thursday at 3 o'clock. What's going on in your school? You could see the immediate impact of legislation or a hateful speech that somebody gives in a school assembly and see what happens as a result. This is really, to me, the power of texting and the power of data. Because while people are talking about data, making it possible for Facebook to find my friend from the 3rd grade, or Target to know when it's time for me to buy more diapers, or some dude to build a better baseball team, I'm actually really excited about the power of data and the power of texting to help that kid go to school, to help that girl stop cutting in the bathroom, and absolutely to help that girl whose father is raping her. Thank you.